Okay.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. And I want to say thank you everyone for tuning in today. I'm really excited to talk to you about gut health. I just wanted to tell you a little bit more about myself. So I am a physician. I'm trained in pulmonary and critical care and internal medicine. And I worked in traditional healthcare for many years. And over time, I just became frustrated with not having enough time for my patients, not really getting to talk to anyone enough. And just, I felt like I was just giving out prescriptions and not really getting people as healthy as they could be and not really reversing disease, mostly just giving prescriptions and treating symptoms. And throughout all this, I was having my own health issues. So I had problems with chronic sinus infections, chronic allergies. I had prediabetes. I had struggles with infertility. And in this time, I was doing research. In medical school, we don't, at least I did not learn a lot about nutrition. Probably if you ask most physicians, they would say the same thing. And I did my own kind of research and looked into nutrition and dietary and lifestyle changes. And I was actually able to reverse all of my problems using just diet and lifestyle. So I actually quit working in regular healthcare a couple years ago, and I took some time off. I have young children, so I wanted to spend time with them. And I found something called health coaching, and I did an online course in that, and I just loved it. And it was kind of like brought together everything that I love about healthcare, like spending time with patients and talking to people, and also nutrition and figuring out how to make diet and lifestyle work for you and reverse chronic disease. So now I've kind of pivoted to that, and I work full time, or well, really part time as a health coach. I like to do talks, I speak, do this kind of thing. And I also work one-on-one with clients to make sustainable dietary changes to help reverse chronic disease. And I know Katie will send you some recipes I have that has my contact information. I'll have that at the end too for you. So again, I'm really excited to talk about gut health because that's where it really all starts. So let's see. Okay. So the topics I want to talk to you about today are: what is gut health? What do I mean by this? Why is this important? I want to talk about the microbiome. I'll define that as well. And we'll talk about dysbiosis, what that means. And finally, how can we have good gut health? So I want to start with a quote that is attributed to Hippocrates, who's considered the father of medicine. And he said this over 2,500 years ago, which I think was really amazing. He said this at a time when we didn't really know anything about bugs or immune system or anything. And he said that all disease begins in the gut. And I thought that was really profound. It may not be 100% true, but very profound thing to say back then. And I'll show you that maybe at least it could be very almost true, almost not quite 100%, but very true. So you might have heard of the phrase, you are what you eat. And I think it's a little bit too simple just to say that, because it's more than that. It's also what we digest, what we absorb, what we incorporate, and what we don't eliminate that really becomes a part of us. And as you can see in this beautiful picture, there's a lot more to it than just what we eat. So here is a kind of a simple cartoon of the digestive tract. And in this picture, it shows you that it starts with the mouth or the saliva, but really digestion begins in the brain, because even thinking about food stimulates the secretion of saliva. And saliva does come into your mouth from salivary glands. They're shown here in your mouth. And actually it doesn't just lubricate your food, it does release some enzymes like amylases that digest carbohydrates and lipases that digest fat. So you actually get some digestion start. The physical process does start in your mouth. Then the food gets transported down your esophagus. This is this muscular tube that leads to your stomach. And the stomach does more than just store food. It's really like the blender of the body, and it mixes your food with digestive juices, stomach acid, and that stomach acid has a really bad rap. It's actually very important for digestion, and it breaks down, it actually helps to extract minerals from the proteins in your food. So the stomach blends everything up. It's like, again, like the blender of the body, and it churns everything into something called chyme, which then gets transported down to your small intestine. And the small intestine has three parts, which are not all labeled, but the first part is the duodenum, then the jejunum, and then the ileum. And it looks kind of short on this picture. It's a simplified picture, but the small intestine is actually about 20 feet long. It's, in most people, it's quite long. And that's where you get most digestion. And you also get most absorption of nutrients, and you get some absorption of water. So that's what's listed here. The small intestine then leads to the large intestine, the colon. It's the same thing. And you get more reabsorption of water, and you get some reabsorption of ions like sodium, potassium, magnesium. And this is also where you store and you make feces. So that, and then that comes out. A couple other important parts of the digestive tract are your liver. Super important. It has a ton of functions. I just listed a few here, but probably has hundreds of functions. Some of which are that it stores vitamins, it makes proteins, it stores iron. It also, I like to call it the queen of detoxification, because it does so much in terms of that. It helps you to metabolize alcohol, metabolize drugs and medications. It does so much. It also makes bile. So your gallbladder actually just stores the bile. That's why you can live without a gallbladder. We just talked about that. But your liver actually makes the bile, and that's to help you digest fats. And then another important organ is the pancreas, which is here. That helps, again, also release digestive enzymes, and that gets dumped into the small intestine here. And also hormones like insulin. So you've probably heard of that. And insulin helps to get blood sugar into your cells. So these are all very important parts of your digestive tract, but another huge important part of your digestive tract that's not labeled because you can't see it is actually your immune system. So the digestive system actually houses 70% of your immune system. And as you can imagine, it's really important here because the inside of your digestive tract is actually like outside of your body. So if you think about it, this is really a long tube, you know, it goes from your mouth, which is of course to the outside, and then to the anus, which is also to the outside. So this is really outside of your body, and it encounters way more bacteria, viruses, toxins, so much more than your systemic immune system does. So there's a lot going on. And it's really important, it's very important for your digestive tract to have a good immune system because it's technically outside. Okay. Oops. So, as I said, definitely your immune system is an important part of gut health, and of course, having a healthy digestive tract. And immune system, we'll talk about a little bit more, but immune system can lead to, immune triggering can lead to inflammation. So having good gut health can potentially lead to less inflammation. But also there's other things too. Gut health can affect your sleep. It can affect your skin, hair, nails, in terms of nutrient absorption. And it can even affect your weight and weight changes. So it's not just your digestive tract alone that's doing all these important things and affecting all these important parts of your health, but it needs something called the microbiome. So the human body is estimated to have about 30 trillion cells just of its own. And then we are actually hosts for, and it's estimated, right now the number is about 39 trillion microbial cells. So we're actually more micro than human, if you think about it. And this includes all different types of organisms like bacteria, viruses, fungi, archaea and protozoans are also one-celled organisms, are extremely primitive that have been around forever. And they're all part of us inside and out. So I'm going to use these words interchangeably, but technically microbiota is the term for all the microbes in and on our bodies. And I'm using it interchangeably with microbiome, which is probably the term you'll hear if you read books or read about it. Microbiome is actually the genetic material of those microbes. And like genetic material that we have, the genetic material of all the microbes, it's like a fingerprint, and it varies from person to person. So gut health means having a healthy digestive tract, and we need our microbes that are in, and most microbes, I should say, are actually in our gut. We need healthy microbes and a healthy digestive tract to have good gut health. We also need healthy microbes. We also need diversity of those microbes. And I'll talk more about the fact that they do lots of things, but it's important to have diversity because sometimes things get knocked out, bugs get knocked out with antibiotics or other medications, and we have other bugs and other organisms to kind of take up the slack. So I told you I would tell you about dysbiosis. I'll talk about more later as well, but dysbiosis means that there's an imbalance in the microbiome or microbiota. So there might be too much bad bacteria, not enough good bacteria, or even not enough diversity of the organisms in your gut. And how do we know this? It's mostly based on animal studies. And also recently, within the last 10 to 15 years or so, there's something called the Human Microbiome Project, which was funded through the National Institute for Health, NIH. And what they did is they looked at microbes in a few different areas of the body and over 250 volunteers to better characterize like the roles of these microbes and what they're doing and just learn more. And there's a ton of research going on now, and there's a lot going on with gut health, and we'll talk about gut brain health, and you'll see there's been so much, and it's definitely coming more into the mainstream and now, so you probably heard more about it now than ever before. Okay, so the microbes have lots of jobs, like I said, and one of them is that they protect our gut lining. So this is another kind of a simple cartoon I wanted to show you, and this is like the inside of the colon. So this, where I'm hovering is like the inside, which would be like the lumen. What we call the inside of the colon is the lumen. And then a really amazing and interesting fact about the colon is that there's only technically one layer, it's only one cell thick between the lumen and then the inside of the body. And that's made up of these epithelial cells. There's also some endocrine cells that secrete hormones that are all part of this one cell layer thick. And there is other things that help to protect us. There's mucus layers, there's an inner and outer, I didn't label it, but an inner and outer mucus layer between the lumen and then these cells. So that helps to protect us as well. And there's microbes here living in the mucus and in these cells. And maybe you've heard of something called leaky gut syndrome. So what is that? There's a technical medical term for that too, and that's enhanced intestinal permeability. So when things are normal and everything's healthy, we have something called tight junctions that connect these cells. And it should look like this, nice and healthy. But when things are not going well, when there's leaky gut or too much permeability, we need some permeability so we can get the nutrients we need. But when there's too much permeability, like these tight junctions are not there or not working properly, we can get too much of stressors, toxins, pathogens, et cetera, that can come through, get to our bloodstream, and then trigger our immune system. And that can lead to inflammation, potentially, or even food sensitivities, malabsorption, nutrient deficiency, and over time, it can lead to a weakened immune system. So and the bugs, including the mucus layer, as well as microbes, help to protect us against getting too much of this. And there's other things we can do too. So like I said, microbes have a lot of jobs, not just protecting us from invaders, but they do a lot of other things too. They actually help to digest food. They make antioxidants. They help to keep bad bacteria in check. They help to regulate our immune system. So not just in the gut, but throughout the body, and also regulate metabolism. They can influence hormone and neurotransmitter production. Actually, 90% of serotonin in the body is actually produced in the gut. And it has a lot of effects in your gut itself. It's not just about mood, but it actually affects peristalsis, moving food throughout the body, motility. So it does a lot within the gut itself. And microbes help to make some vitamins, including vitamin K, and even some B vitamins, including folate. Again, so there's probably at least we know of about 1,000 different species of bacteria that live in our gut. There's also other kinds of organisms, as I mentioned before, like viruses, fungi, protozoa, all different things. And we need a diversity. And having a good diversity is great for gut health, and dysbiosis is not. And having this reduced diversity has been shown to be associated with diseases like inflammatory bowel syndrome, obesity, diabetes, colon cancer, autoimmune disease, heart disease, even neuropsychiatric diseases. So as I showed you before, if we have too much toxins and allergens coming through, that can potentially get to our bloodstream and trigger inflammation. So having an altered gut microbiome or not enough good healthy bugs there has been associated with increased inflammation. And that's everywhere because it can get to the bloodstream, which then goes throughout the body. And an altered gut microbiome has also been associated with impaired immune function as well. One example of how gut bacteria can affect, or what's the connection with these diseases, is that gut bacteria produce something called short chain fatty acids. And I'll talk about how that happens later and how you can get more of that. But gut bacteria produce short chain fatty acids, and there's a few different types: propionate, acetate, butyrate. They do all sorts of things throughout the body, and one of which is that they help, propionate in particular, helps with glucose tolerance and insulin sensitivity. Insulin, again, is that hormone that helps to get blood sugar into cells. So there's an association with a decreased risk for diabetes. Okay. So I mentioned there is a connection with neuropsychiatric diseases as well. So there's also a gut-brain connection. And maybe you've said, I have a gut feeling, or I have butterflies in my stomach, or she's gutsy. There's definitely some science behind that. So there is something called the gut-brain axis. Now there's different parts of our nervous system. There's the central nervous system, which is with the brain, peripheral nervous system, which helps us move. And then there's the autonomic nervous system. And that's more about our emotions. So I'm sure you've heard of fight or flight, and that's the sympathetic nervous system. And that helps us get alert, focused, run away from predators, or get worried about things. It's designed for short term, though. We shouldn't be living in a sympathetic state. And that's probably a talk for another time. But that's fight or flight. And the opposite of the sympathetic nervous system is the parasympathetic nervous system. And that is our rest and digest system. It's what helps us heal, recover, relax. And actually, that's where we're supposed to be most of the time. And the parasympathetic nervous system is controlled by the vagus nerve. And again, I have another cartoon for you just to show you what I'm talking about. The vagus nerve comes off of the brainstem here, and it goes throughout the body. It goes to different parts of the body: the heart, the lungs, the throat, and the intestines. So within the intestines, it helps to control the enteric nervous system. And by enteric, I mean, that means gut. So that's kind of interchangeable with the word gut. So there's an enteric nervous system that's about 2 thin layers of 100 million nervous cells that line your digestive system. And again, that's controlled by the vagus nerve, or the rest and digest. So the main role of this enteric nervous system is to control digestion, but there's probably other functions. And in animal studies, when they've cut the vagus nerve, which sounds awful, vagotomy, they cut it, digestion still happens, but other things don't. So it's really interesting. There's definitely other things going on. So this gut-brain axis includes the vagus nerve, like I mentioned before, but also the immune system. There's bacterial products and metabolites that are produced that are also mediating crosstalk between the brain and the gut. And so I said that the vagus nerve goes from the brain to the gut, but there's actually nerves that also go from the gut to the brain. So there's definitely a lot of crosstalk happening. And we are learning more and more about exactly how they talk to each other. We don't know every single pathway or exactly how it's happening, but we definitely know that the microbiome is involved, and probably through these products and metabolites. So the crosstalk is happening, and a healthy gut-brain axis contributes to improved cognition, improved memory, improved mood, improved learning, eating behaviors, appetite regulation, even lower stress. So just an example, just so you can kind of see how this is being studied. There's animal studies that'll show that if you do transplants, like a fecal microbiota transplant, so you're actually taking concentrated stool from one mouse to another mouse. This is done in animal studies. And you put it from one mouse to a germ-free mouse. That's like a mouse that's been raised to have no bacteria at all, no organisms at all. They can do that with mice, and they'll put it into that mouse. So if you have one with depression type behaviors, and they have ways of showing that in mice, and you put it into a germ-free mouse, you'll see the same behaviors. So it's really interesting. There's definitely crosstalk and a lot more happening than just control of digestion. Okay, so hopefully I showed you how having a healthy gut is important for our gut-brain axis, for our immune system, and for other major functions. But how do we know, is there anything that can kind of tell us earlier, like before we get any type of disease, that might be kind of helpful to know beforehand? So that's where dysbiosis, I think, comes in. And again, that's where there's an imbalance in your microbiota. So there might be too much bad bacteria, not enough good bacteria, there's reduced diversity. So some questions to ask of whether you might have this. Do you have unexplained bloating? Is there constipation, chronic diarrhea? Are you taking antacids like Tums, for example, every day or almost every day? Do you have unexplained brain fog? And brain fog is kind of like a feeling of where there's a veil over everything you're thinking. You can't seem to think clearly. Do you have severe stress? Have you taken antibiotics more than 2 times in a year? That's definitely a lot. That's something you might want to talk about with your physician. And we'll also talk more about how we can improve from these symptoms if you think you might have it. So again, I told you what dysbiosis is: reduced diversity, not enough good, too much bad. And it can result from new medications, especially antibiotics. Unfortunately, that can knock out a lot of your good bacteria and create an imbalance. It can be from poor diet, and I have a lot of slides on that. Regular excessive alcohol consumption, chronic stress or anxiety. And again, common symptoms do include the bloating, gas, constipation, diarrhea. But because potentially this could lead to inflammation, this could lead to leaky gut, you can also get symptoms in other parts of the body, like joint aches, the allergies, brain fog, even depression and anxiety can result from this. So how can we have good gut health? So how, and I should say back with dysbiosis, sometimes you do need certain supplements, certain targeted antibiotics or antifungals to improve, but most of the time you can actually resolve this with a good, healthy diet. And I'm going to talk about how we can have good gut health and hopefully fix that. So I'm not one of those people that tells, everybody has to eat this way or that way, vegan or paleo or anything like that. I think there's not one way of eating or one diet that fits everybody, but I think there's a few things we can all do. And first of all, we can all eat fresh fruits and vegetables as much as we can. If you can get organic, that's great. Those foods tend to have lower pesticides and toxins if you can. And one way to kind of decide if I know it's not always available and it can be expensive. So one way to decide which ones you're going to get is through this list that's published by something called the Environmental Working Group. It's a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization. They publish these lists. You can just Google it and find these. And they publish a dirty dozen list every year and a clean 15. So dirty dozen are the fruits and vegetables they recommend to definitely try to get organic because they have a higher concentration of toxins and pesticides. So that usually includes that almost always includes strawberries, spinach. I feel like those are always on the list. Usually leafy greens, apples, grapes, cherries, things like that. And by the way, they've not published the 2022 list yet. So this is the most up to date that I found. The clean 15 are the fruits and vegetables that have lower concentration of pesticides and toxins. And again, you can easily find it on their website. And I noticed that these fruits and vegetables tend to have a thicker outer layer, like avocados, pineapple, papaya. They tend to have a thicker layer that helps, I think, make them more resistant or prevents getting too much absorption of the pesticides and toxins. And luckily it does include vegetables like broccoli, cabbage, cauliflower. Those are cruciferous vegetables, which are great for your gut. They love that kind of vegetable. So I'm glad those are not, you don't absolutely have to get organic, but those are great vegetables to always include in your diet. Another topic, it's kind of controversial about whether or not it's necessarily good or bad. And if you look up literature on this, like I did, you would find probably both sides. And, not sure who's funding all these different studies, but genetically modified organisms, or GMOs. And what that is where scientists or farmers would put genetic material from one plant into another, or one bacterium into a plant to make it more resistant to pesticides or toxins or infections. So they'll do this so that they'll be more resistant. And so, I think it's a little controversial. I think, it's not necessarily, I think everyone should make up their own mind. You can read about it and decide for yourself. But I'll just say that there is something called a non-GMO project. They lobbied to get these labeled, to get foods labeled. So next time you go to the store, you'll look for this. You can see this on most like packaged goods. And I will say a lot of European countries actually have banned GMO foods. So that's just something to keep in mind. And just wanted to go a little more into this. So organic foods are non-GMO. They have to be non-GMO. That's part of the definition. Organic foods are grown without synthetic pesticides. So they can still use organic pesticides. Like there's some more natural things like certain oils and certain like even like garlic and onion can be used as pesticides. So they can still use organic, but not synthetic pesticides or fertilizers or herbicides. And animal or dairy products that are organic are from animals that are not given antibiotics or hormones and are fed organic feed. So that's just something to remember too. If it's labeled natural, that's something that has no artificial colors or flavors, no artificial preservatives, no irradiated products or ingredients. So those are all good things too, but you don't know how they were grown. So there might be other synthetic pesticides or fertilizers. If something's antibiotic free, you just want to make sure you look for this. You'll look for the USDA processed verified shield or organic, since organic should not have any antibiotics. And then hormone free. Sometimes, again, hormones and antibiotics, they're also both used to promote growth in animals. So something to keep in mind. And in the US, actually, hormones are not allowed in pork or poultry anymore. And that's been for a few years now. And then the final category, conventional, is kind of a free-for-all. They can have anything, antibiotics, hormones, pesticides, and it's usually not labeled that way. I wanted to show you an example of conventional versus organic. And like I said, conventional is not going to be labeled. And this is just 2 packages of chicken breast. And I just want to show you the difference. Just not too much. They both don't have antibiotics or hormones. But if you look at the diet, just something to think about. Organic chicken has to have organic vegetarian diet. So just something to keep in mind. That's probably the biggest difference, and the price, of course. Okay, so some other ways to have good gut health. Probably, I guess there's a couple things I hope you take away from this. Is probably one would be to limit your processed foods. And what do I mean by processed? So processed foods are going to be foods over here to this side of the arrow. Foods that are less processed are foods that are close to nature. So this is, for example, an ear of corn. That's something you recognize. It has greater nutrient density. It's high in fiber, vitamins, minerals. But as we go along this arrow, things get more processed and it gets harder to recognize them. You know, candy corn, we still know this is popcorn. I think this is like a cereal. Then we get to chips. And unfortunately, in the processing, you lose your fiber, your vitamins, your minerals, and unfortunately, you get saturated fat, sugar, and salt. And these are the things that we don't want. These are things that are not good for the gut. Again, just more on processed food. Some processing is not necessarily that bad. So unprocessed is, of course, the best. That's food that we just find if you went out and picked it, you know, some carrots and vegetables, and they are the highest, usually the highest in nutrients and fiber. Some processing is okay because sometimes foods, some vegetables, certain vegetables or fruits will be picked at the peak ripeness and actually have the most vitamins and nutrients, and they get frozen in that state, and it's actually okay. You know, if they're canned or frozen, preserved, things like that. You just have to be careful of added sugar or fat or salt. So just make sure you look at the labels. So these things are not necessarily bad. It's really when we get to the ultra processed, we don't know where it came from. Like it's probably corn or soy or wheat. We know there's going to be more fat and sugar and salt. And these are usually the packaged, usually the plastic wrap. So these are the things we want to stay away from far over here. Again, lower sugar and refined carbohydrates. And sugar, I don't mean fruit. I'm talking about, you know, more cookies, cakes, you know, pies, things like that. And by refined carbohydrates, I mean anything with like refined flour. So anything where you're stripping the bran, the wheat, and you're getting using white flour products, things like that, white rice, white flour, things like that. Another point that can help with your gut is to always cook your own food whenever possible. I think maybe a lot of us did that during COVID. Hopefully we were still doing it. You just know exactly what's going into your food. You know what type of, you know, oils you're using, good quality oils, organic vegetables. You know, when you go to a restaurant, you don't know what you're using, unfortunately. And probably the other thing I want you to take away from this talk is to increase your fiber intake. It is really great for your gut. And I'm going to tell you why. So fiber is super important. I think it also maybe gets a bad rap. It's not just about constipation. It's really important. So fiber actually feeds your gut bacteria. And that's how they make those short chain fatty acids, which are great for preventing chronic disease. So fiber is really important. There's different types of fiber. There's something called soluble fiber. It's found in oats, nuts, fruits, vegetables. There's another type, kind of like it's a type of fiber, it's resistant starch. And that just means it's not digested in the small intestine. It gets to the large intestine where it helps to feed all the gut bacteria and they break it down. That can be found in like raw bananas, green bananas, oats, beans, cooked and cooled starches. And then there's non-fermentable fiber. So that doesn't feed your gut bacteria, but still good. This is where it helps to bulk up your stools, helps with constipation, the insoluble fiber, whole grains, nuts, fruits, and vegetables. And as you can see, most fruits and vegetables have both insoluble and soluble fiber. So it's good to eat both, a lot of those, and that's good for your gut. In particular, some other high fiber foods, lentils, chickpeas, split peas, especially, these are all like really high fiber, artichokes, raspberries, avocados, and just, you know, eating a variety of these fruits and vegetables actually helps to promote diversity in your gut bacteria. And we learned that having diversity of your gut bacteria is a good thing and helps to promote health. And I know last time I did this, people asked, you know, how much fiber do we need? So currently the USDA, the Department of Agriculture recommendations are 25 grams a day for women and about 35 grams a day for men. And that's based on caloric intake. So it's actually, you know, certain amount of grams per calorie per 1,000 or so, something like that, like 14 grams per 1,000, something like that. So I'm not sure if I don't know if, I hope they change it. I hope it's, you know, I think having more is better with fiber. Probably the optimal goal might be 35 to 40 grams for everyone. And, you know, even if you look at their own dietary guidelines that I referenced here, they talk about how it reduces coronary heart disease. Eating fiber-rich foods helps to lower cholesterol. It's associated with a healthy weight. And as I mentioned before, it increases the gut bacteria production of short chain fatty acids. So eating fiber is usually a great thing, and increasing it is a good thing. If you haven't had a lot of fiber in your diet, I wouldn't go from 5 to 40 right away. You want to kind of go a little slower. But, and I just wanted to show you this graphic again of just different vegetables and fruits that have different amounts of fiber, just so you can kind of get an idea. And this website that I referenced here, you can look, it's through the Department of Agriculture as well. You can just go and they have a little search engine. You can put in any fruit, vegetable, or food, and it'll tell you exactly how much fiber per serving. So that's a great resource too, if you're looking to add more fiber. So a couple other terms I want to talk about that are important with gut health, and you probably have heard. So one is prebiotics. So prebiotics is kind of what I just been talking about. Prebiotics are basically fiber. So food that feeds your gut bacteria, fruits, vegetables, whole grains, apples, all these different fruits and vegetables we just talked about are all technically prebiotic foods. And eating a lot of these actually helps to stimulate the growth of probiotic-like bacteria in your own gut. So eating prebiotic type foods, fiber, is great for many reasons. Some foods you might see might be fortified with prebiotics. So you'll see something like oligosaccharides or inulin, chicory fiber, fructooligosaccharides, all those are prebiotics. And on their own, they're okay. It's when you see it added to bars and things like that, you just want to be careful with the added sugar and all that. So, if you don't want to just get it from fruits and vegetables, you want to have a little bit extra, you can actually buy these on their own. You can get inulin powder. There's acacia fiber, I didn't write down here, chicory fiber, and it's like a powder, and you can actually just add it right to a smoothie. You can even mix it into coffee or tea, and that's something I do. So you don't have to get it in those sugary, granola bars and things like protein bars and things like that. So probiotics, probably something that's also kind of trendy, you've heard about. Technically, what probiotics are live yeast and bacteria that live in your body and are beneficial. But then, of course, companies will bottle them up and sell them to you as supplements. And I don't think everyone needs them. Like I said before, if you're eating lots of good, healthy prebiotic foods, you can actually increase probiotics on naturally. But some of them are definitely, if you choose to do that, these are some popular ones. Lactobacillus bifido are especially good if you're on antibiotics. Those are good ones to take. Saccharomyces is good for kids, especially if they're having diarrhea. And if you do decide to purchase them, just make sure you look for a batch number and expiration date. I think I'm not necessarily an expert on probiotics, but I would tend to get live. You can get live or dead, but I would say probably choose live and look for these, make sure they're fresh. So that's something I would look for. And one other term I didn't write down here is postbiotics, which is actually the products that the gut bacteria make through fermenting foods. So all those short chain fatty acids, those are what postbiotics are. And so that's something you can't buy. That's something you just have to work on with your diet. And I know you had a fermented food talk recently, and I think that's great. Fermented foods are foods that are produced through controlled microbial growth, so they can act like probiotics. And fermentation's been going on forever. It's been used historically to preserve foods. I'm sure they talked about that, and to preserve foods, in some cases make them edible. And technically, fermentation is the conversion of carbohydrate into alcohol or acids using microbes under anaerobic, and that means no oxygen, anaerobic conditions. So there's wild ferment or spontaneous ferment. That's where there's like a naturally fermented food like sauerkraut or kimchi. You basically, I think they did that. You basically just cut up cabbage or whatever vegetable, put it in a jar with salt and close it. And that will just naturally ferment on its own. There's something called culture dependent ferments, and that's where you add a mother or a starter, like kombucha is a fermented tea, kefir is a yogurt drink, natto is a fermented soybean, it's really good for your gut. And some other examples are miso, sourdough bread, tempeh is a fermented soybean as well, yogurt, of course. So all these foods can also help to naturally increase probiotic bacteria in your gut. So in conclusion, I hope I was able to convey how important gut health is. And gut health means having a healthy digestive tract and healthy microbes. And these microbes in our gut work really hard. They work with our immune system, our nervous system, and influence our overall health. So we're all unique, and I don't think one way of eating fits everyone. However, I hope you take away a few things, is that to eat whole, minimally processed foods whenever you can. Try to eat organic if you can, at least with the dirty dozen. Cook your own meals when you can, so you know exactly what is going into your food, and try to increase your fiber intake. I hope I conveyed that to you too. So I'm so happy to get to do this at the library. I love to read too. So these are just some of the books I used, if you're interested, that I thought were very helpful. I used all of these for preparing for this talk, and some of them have recipes like Fiber Fueled and Good Gut. So these are some great resources. And if you or someone you know would like to work with me, you can find me on my website. I also have a newsletter I send out a couple times a month. You can sign up for on my website as well. I'm on Instagram, or you can email me anytime. So thank you so much. And thank you, Katie. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Bobbie. I see a few questions here. One person said, what does one do if they have a mild form of colitis and cannot eat fresh vegetables?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, eating cooked vegetables is totally fine. And, if there's, hopefully that person is working with someone. There are lots of ways to increase vegetable intake. You can definitely, cook vegetables are great. That's a great way to, you still get fiber, you still get prebiotics that way. And possibly slowly adding, I don't want to, it's different with everyone, but possibly slowly adding in a little bit of raw, they could try that. I hopefully that person is working like a nutritionist or a dietitian, and try to work with ways to increase fruit and vegetables, but cooked is perfectly fine, especially if you can't tolerate it. So I would, yeah.
Great. I see Richard's asking if you can make the slides available. I can send out the recording to everybody who registered, if that makes it easier. Sure. Diane asks, how much soluble versus insoluble fiber should one get every day?
I wouldn't worry about like the breakdown so much. It depends. Like I said, everyone's a little different. I think, if there's constipation, you might want to try to get more insoluble fiber, but I would just really try to get that goal of, try to get 25, 30, 35 grams. I would just try to get a total. I wouldn't worry about the breakdown so much. That's what I would say for that.
Okay. Sue said she believes GMO is primarily used to make plants resistant to Roundup and glyphosate.
Glyphosate, yes, glyphosate, thank you.
Which is a serious toxin.
Yes.
I saw a documentary recently by somebody who was studying the effects of Roundup on the reproductive system, particularly. It's really interesting.
I feel like that's a whole other topic too.
Yeah.
I don't know. Yeah, there's a lot to talk about with glyphosate. I thank you for bringing that up. I didn't even want to go there.
Raka asks, would you mind repeating the probiotic product you put in your coffee?
Oh, I use something called acacia fiber, which I could email to you, Katie, if you want to send out. Sure. And it's just, so it'll add a little extra prebiotic fiber to your diet, and you can't taste it. Yeah, it's great. I'll it's called Acacia, ACA. Oh, I guess can I put that in the chat? I
Sure.
could put it in there. See, it's called Acacia. It's like a powder. So
Okay. What would you recommend for those with IBS?
Well, I think that's a very individual type of question. I think that's kind of hard to address just in one answer. Because there can be a lot of things going on with IBS. Usually, I mean, diet definitely helps in trying to eat. If you can't eat organic, and try to, some people recommend elimination diet. I'm technically not a nutritionist, but these are some of the things I would suggest. And I don't know what this person has tried. These are just a couple of things you might want to try to start with. Elimination diet, like especially dairy, wheat, or dairy and gluten, I should say. Those are can be triggers for that. So I would start there, but I think that's very individual. So that's hard to say, knowing the person. Yeah.
Sure. I have a lot of questions here. Why does one get constipated for a period of 6 to 8 days, even while eating a very large fiber diet?
That's a good question. Well, make sure, sometimes too much fiber can actually be constipating. So it depends. I'm not sure exactly what the person's eating, but make sure the person, whoever that is drinking lots of water. We need water to kind of lubricate, get everything out. But sometimes, unfortunately, it's weird. Sometimes too much fiber can be too much, depending on what the person's eating. And you want to make sure you're eating diversity of different foods. I don't know if it's like one type. Make sure you're eating a range of different foods, lots of water, hopefully not too much caffeine, which can kind of dehydrate you. And, that can also lead to constipation. So there could be a lot of reasons for that too. Those are some of the things I would start with. Yeah.
Great. Is there a way to measure how much good microbes are in your gut to correct a deficiency?
Yeah, there's lots of, one way is to a lot of functional medicine physicians, which I'm not a functional medicine physician yet, although I'm working on that. They do stool studies, and there's lots of, there are different, there's things called like GI map and different stool sample studies that you can get. They tend to be a little expensive, but if you could start with finding either integrative or like a functional medicine physician or healthcare provider, and they can probably work on that with you. I don't know if most traditional gastroenterologists do that kind of stuff, so I would probably look for someone else. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Would you make any different recommendations to patients with autoimmune diseases that are not celiac disease?
In terms of, I guess, your specific, in terms of diet or just, there's lots of, there's lots of different resources for people with autoimmune disease. I think they do tend to get they are kind of lumped together. It's pretty much the same process. So, but of course with celiac, you want to avoid gluten more than anything, but there's different diets, there's different protocols, AIP protocol, there's Wall's protocol, there's different, if we're just talking about diet, things to work on. So there's a lot of different resources for people with autoimmune, and probably one of the first things we always recommend is like an elimination diet, and going from there.
Okay. How is leaky gut identified?
That's a good question. It's, now it's kind of just based on symptoms right now. And unfortunately, there's not really the greatest tests that can identify it. We really base it on talking to the patient's symptoms and kind of working with that. And if you went to like a traditional provider, they may not, they may not say, you know, it exists at all. But there's definitely a lot of research being done on it. And there's certain triggers, like gluten actually can, unfortunately, not for everybody, but can trigger that. And so it's really all about symptoms and getting to know the person and, you know, trying to figure out if that's going on. It's not really a great test. So, yeah.
Okay. I think you sort of touched on this before, but how do you feel about elimination diets like paleo?
Yeah, you know, I think if you're having food sensitivities or any type, really any type of GI issues, I think it's great to just try it. Even something short, like I like to recommend Whole30 because it's 1 month. And if people, especially people like to eat meat, that's a great one to do because you eliminate dairy and gluten and actually beans and things like that too, just for a month. And just to see, you know, how you feel. There's plenty of other, you don't have to do that one. There's plenty of other diets. But especially if you're having a lot of, you know, bloating, constipation, gas, any of those things, I think it's a great thing to try.
Okay.
Yeah.
What do you suggest if you can't eat vegetables because of taste, but have an autoimmune disease? Anything to substitute?
Well, I think that I would love to talk to that person because, yeah, I'd love to see if there's, you know, is there any vegetable you like? Do you like it anyway? Do you like it cooked? Do you like it mixed with something? You know, I think there's always a place to start. So, you know, even just a tiny bit of spinach into something, you know, because you can't really taste it. You know, I'd probably want to see if there's just any vegetable. Is there a frozen vegetable? It could be cooked, anything. Like we could find ways to mix it into things. I would want to start somewhere with that.
Okay. Does fasting help or hurt your gut?
Yeah, I was wondering if anyone's going to ask me that. I think there's studies coming out now that it does help and can, there's been there's definitely a lot of studies with chronic disease, diabetes, especially, and autoimmune diseases that it definitely helps in terms of glucose control and things like that. And we know there's so much with the microbiome. So I can't see how it's not related, but I think we're still learning more about it. But I think definitely in terms of chronic disease, yes. And we know there's a link with microbiome and chronic disease. So I think yes. I think we're learning more and more.
Okay. Someone asked, do you recommend a specific acacia fiber?
Oh, I personally use, I believe it's the Now brand and NOW, sorry, just Now. I think that's what it's called. So I can just double check that. But I would just make sure you look at it's called Now and just look at the ingredients, make sure it just says acacia fiber, nothing else.
Okay.
Yeah.
There are lots of nice comments here. Reinforced what I know and gave me a new way of looking at adding fresh fiber to my diet. Someone asked, what are you looking for in someone to work with you?
Oh, yes. I love to work with people, especially with asthma or diabetes that are looking to get off their medications. So I want to work with people with chronic disease that are really trying to work on their diet and lifestyle changes to be free of medications. So those are the people I want to work with.
Okay. Do MDs have required nutritional studies?
Nutritional study. You know, when I was in medical school, in terms of we maybe had an hour or two, so we didn't have much of any, and I hope that's changing. You know, it's been a while since I've been in medical school, so and now, no, definitely not. Like in terms of, you know, if you're just let's say an internist or just a, you know, not nutrition based at all. Doctors do not have any type of nutrition requirements. If that's not part of our like CME, or if that's what you mean. No, you can do it as part of CME, but it's not required. So I wish it were. I think it should be.
Okay. How can emotional and psychological imbalance affect the function of the large intestine to pass stools?
To pass stools. That's a good question. I mean, I think probably it's, we're seeing there's definitely a relationship with the microbiome and the gut-brain connection. So I don't know if we know exactly how it all works, but I think we're still learning about that. And so am I. So I'm always reading about that kind of stuff. I don't know if we know exactly, and I'm not sure if I can answer that completely, but I love that question. Thank you.
Okay. Related to the fasting question, how do you feel about the latest diet craze, intermittent fasting?
So yeah, I think for certain people, I don't think everybody has to do it. I think definitely, I would say especially people with diabetes, I think it's fantastic and can really help with glucose control. So for certain individuals, I think it's wonderful. And if you are trying to lose weight, I think, yes, it can be helpful as well. I think because there's, time restricted versus intermittent fasting. And I don't think they're exactly the same, but there's different diets, like eat a little bit less 2 days or eat less on 5 days and then eat what you want 2 days. There's different ways of doing it. And some are a little more successful with weight loss, but definitely for diabetes, I think it's excellent. Yeah.
Okay. That's all I have in the chat. If
Okay.
anybody else has, or is it best to take acacia between meals or with meals?
I would say, you can definitely just mix it into like a drink, and it's, I would say if you're going to have it with just a drink by itself, like tea or coffee or something, I would just try a little bit. Don't take the full serving that they suggest. I would try a little bit first and make sure it doesn't bother your stomach, and don't feel bloated or anything like that. And if you're feeling fine, I would slowly increase to whatever the serving is, or you can definitely just have it with a meal and no problem.
Okay. If anybody else has any questions, feel free to jump in if you'd like. That's all I have in the chat. Or what about portion control?
Oh, what about portion control? Is there anything more specific about that? I think that if we're eating a good healthy diet, you can eat as much vegetables for sure as you want. And I think with like proteins and meat, one thing is I think people probably think they don't get enough protein, but we probably get too much. So that's one thing you can kind of be a little bit more careful about. But with vegetables and things like that, I would just, in terms of that, I would go to town. I don't know. And I will say, basically, like if you're doing like a plant-based diet, people usually tend to eat a lot. And when you're eating a lot of fiber, you actually get full faster. And that has to do with the weight changes. So when you're eating a lot of fiber, you get full faster and you won't even want to eat, too much or whatever, worry about that as much. So hopefully that makes sense.
Okay. Any more questions? Feel free to jump in if you'd like. Otherwise, it looks like that might be it. Bobbie, thank you so much. This has been so informative. And I will send out the recording and so people can refer back. Yeah, thank you again.
Thanks so much for having me. This was fun. Thank you. I hope please reach out if you have any questions or follow me on Instagram.
Excellent.
Okay.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody. And I hope to see you at something again soon.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
All right.
Katie, I have a question. If for somebody who was not able to get on, since this was such a very popular introduction, how will they get a copy? Can they?
I will send you an email to the link to the recording.
Okay, so that other people could share it.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
All right.
This was wonderful.
Great.
No.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody. I'm stopping.